What if the teacher who transformed my understanding of wealth had discovered a secret about consciousness that most people will never know? A secret so powerful it allowed his students to materialize money from seemingly impossible circumstances. My name is Neville Goddard, and what I'm about to reveal will change how you think about prosperity forever. For 5 years I studied under a mysterious Ethiopian mystic named Abdullah. This man knew my name before we ever met. He claimed he'd been expecting me for 6 months. And what he taught me about the vibration of wealth, long before anyone used that word, transformed not just my life, but the lives of everyone who truly understood his teaching. But here's what shocked me most. Abdullah never taught visualization techniques. He never gave me affirmations. He never told me to work harder or think more positively. Instead, he revealed something about consciousness that modern science is only now beginning to understand. He understood that poverty and prosperity aren't about circumstances. They're about the frequency of your consciousness broadcast every single moment of every single day. He taught me that there is no cause outside the arrangement of your own mind. And when you change that arrangement, when you shift the vibration of your consciousness from poverty to wealth, money flows to you through paths you never could have imagined. Today, I'm revealing the exact wealth vibration secret Abdullah taught me. The same method that took me from unemployed dancer to financial freedom. The same principle that transformed one of his students from believing he was a secondary citizen to netting $250,000 per year. And the same secret that allowed a desperate 55-year-old woman with no job and no support to receive a $2,500 windfall followed by lifetime income. This isn't theory. This is a method that's been proven for over 90 years. But I must warn you, what Abdullah taught me requires something most people refuse to give: complete honesty about the consciousness you're currently living in. Are you ready? Then let me tell you about the day I met the most extraordinary teacher who ever lived. New York City, 1931. The Great Depression had crushed the dreams of millions, and I was numbered among the broken. I was a failed dancer, unemployed, desperate. I had heard whispers about a mystic who taught ancient wisdom, and in my desperation I sought him out. I walked into that small lecture hall on West 72nd Street, and there sat Abdullah, this imposing Ethiopian man with eyes that seemed to pierce through the veil of time itself. I had never seen this man before in my life, never spoken his name, never sent word that I was coming. But before I could even introduce myself, before I could speak a single word, he looked directly at me and said something that still echoes in my soul. Neville, you're 6 months late. I blinked, confused. I beg your pardon? The brothers told me you would come, he said calmly. You're 6 months late, but you're right on time. How did this stranger know my name? How did he know I was destined to find him? I would later understand that consciousness recognizes consciousness. Abdullah's awareness was so refined, so attuned to the deeper currents of reality, that he could read patterns invisible to ordinary perception. You see, he understood something that took me years to fully grasp. Your consciousness is broadcasting information constantly. It's like a radio station that never stops transmitting. And those who have refined their awareness can detect these broadcasts. But what Abdullah taught me went far beyond reading consciousness. He taught me how to change the frequency I was broadcasting, how to shift from the poverty vibration to the wealth vibration. And once I learned this secret, everything changed. But before he would teach me anything about manifesting wealth, Abdullah made me do something that most people would refuse to do. Something that exposed the truth about myself I didn't want to face. After that first meeting, I began studying with Abdullah. And the first thing he told me shocked me. Neville, he said, you must first start with self. Find self. Don't be ashamed ever of the being you are. Discover it and start the changing of that self. I didn't understand what he meant at first. Find self? I knew who I was. I was Neville Goddard, an unemployed dancer trying to learn manifestation techniques. But Abdullah shook his head. No, you don't know the self you truly are. You've never examined the consciousness that's creating your poverty. And until you find it and face it, no technique in the world will help you. He taught me what he called uncritical observation of self, not judgment, not condemnation, simply honest examination of the thoughts, beliefs, and assumptions that were creating my experience of lack. And when I finally really looked at my consciousness, I was horrified. I discovered I was ashamed to want wealth. I was afraid of success. I secretly believed that money was somehow spiritually corrupt. I held unconscious beliefs I didn't even know existed. Rich people are greedy. Money corrupts. I don't deserve abundance. This poor self wasn't just in my thoughts. It lived in the arrangement of my entire consciousness. It was in the way I walked, the way I spoke, the way I unconsciously expected rejection and limitation. And then Abdullah told me something that changed everything. Your description of the world is a confession of the self that you do not know. Every time I complained about lack of opportunity, I was confessing my consciousness of limitation. Every time I blamed external circumstances, I was revealing the powerless self I was protecting. Every time I spoke of money as scarce or difficult, I was broadcasting the poverty vibration that was creating my experience. There is no cause outside the arrangement of your own mind. Abdullah insisted, if you are poor, it's not because of the economy, not because of lack of opportunity. It's because of the arrangement of beliefs in your consciousness. This was the brutal truth I needed to hear. But it was also liberating, because if poverty was created by my consciousness, it could be changed by my consciousness. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Neville, this sounds powerful. But when I try to change my consciousness, when I try to feel wealthy, it feels fake, like I'm lying to myself. And that's exactly where most people get stuck. They discover their poverty consciousness, but then they try to force themselves into wealth consciousness. They try to manufacture feelings. They strain and struggle and end up more frustrated than when they started. This is why I want to share something with you. There are 5 gentle shifts that help you transform your consciousness without force, without pretending, and without exhausting yourself. These aren't complex techniques. They're simple practices that work with your consciousness naturally, not against it. If you want these 5 shifts that make the transformation feel effortless, simply comment reset below, and you'll receive them for free. You'll discover why feeling fake is actually a sign you're on the right track, and you'll learn the exact method that makes your desired wealth feel like a memory instead of a hope. But first, let me show you what happened when I began to apply Abdullah's teaching. Once Abdullah showed me the poor self I had been unknowingly carrying, he taught me how to transform it. After you discover that self, he said, then you start changing this self. But here's what made Abdullah's method completely different from anything else I'd ever heard. He didn't teach me to fight my poor self or try to destroy it. He taught me to consciously become a different self entirely. The acceptance of self is the essence of the transformation, Abdullah explained. When you accept the current self without shame, only then can you choose to become a new self. He showed me that the poor self and the wealthy self are 2 completely different arrangements of consciousness. They think differently. They speak differently. They move through the world differently. And here's the secret. You cannot serve both selves. One must die for the other to live. Abdullah taught me to assume I was already the wealthy self. Not someday, not when conditions change, but right now, in this moment. How will you know you've truly changed? He asked me. By observing your automatic reactions. If I assume wealth, but my reactions remain those of a poor man, anxiety about money, resentment toward the rich, fear of rejection, then I hadn't truly changed. But when my consciousness shifted, my reactions would automatically shift with it. The goal was to reach the state where I was no longer thinking of wealth. I was thinking from wealth, where all my energy flowed from that wealthy state until it became so stable it expelled all rivals. And slowly, gradually, something extraordinary began to happen. My circumstances hadn't changed yet. I was still unemployed, still broke, but something inside me had shifted. I moved differently. I spoke differently. I expected differently. I was becoming the wealthy self. But then came the real test. The moment when Abdullah would show me whether this transformation was real or just wishful thinking. And what happened next proved beyond any doubt that this method works in ways that seem almost impossible. Let me tell you about a woman who attended my lectures. She wrote to me with a story that perfectly demonstrates the power of Abdullah's wealth vibration teaching. This woman was 55 years old, unemployed, no family to support her, behind in her rent. Her bank account was nearly empty. Her car was falling apart. She needed practically everything, and she had nowhere to turn. She'd been attending my lectures for almost a year, and in her desperation, she decided to put what I taught to the test. She had nothing left to lose. At first, she tried to imagine every single thing she needed: a new car, money for rent, proper clothes for job interviews, a decent job. But the list was so long and so overwhelming that by the time she finished imagining it all, she was exhausted and couldn't sleep. Then she remembered something I had taught from Abdullah's wisdom. Instead of imagining every single item, she decided to capture one feeling, the feeling that something wonderful was happening to her right now. Not tomorrow, not next week, but now. Every night as she fell asleep, she would say to herself, "Isn't it wonderful? Something marvelous is happening to me now." And she would feel the way she would expect to feel if something wonderful really was happening. She didn't strain. She didn't force. She simply assumed the feeling of the wish fulfilled and let it saturate her consciousness as she drifted off to sleep. She did this every single night for 2 months. Then one day in early October, she ran into a casual friend she hadn't seen in months. They chatted briefly about New York City, where this woman had lived many years ago. Just small talk. Nothing significant. She completely forgot about the conversation. 1 month later, to the day, this man appeared at her apartment door and handed her a certified check made out in her name for $2,500. When the shock wore off, the story that unfolded seemed like a dream. The check was from an old friend she hadn't seen or heard from in more than 25 years. This friend, she learned, had become extremely wealthy during those years. The casual acquaintance who brought her the check had met this wealthy friend by accident during a trip to New York. During their conversation, they'd spoken of him. And for reasons she would never fully understand, because to this day she's never heard from him personally, this old friend decided to share a portion of his wealth with her. But here's where the story becomes truly miraculous. For the next 2 years, she received monthly checks from his attorney's office. Not small checks, generous amounts that covered every necessary expense and left plenty over for all the lovely things of life. A new car, beautiful clothes, a spacious apartment, and best of all, no need to worry about earning her daily bread. Then, this past month, she received a letter and legal documents providing for the continuation of this monthly income for the rest of her natural life. All of this from simply assuming the feeling, "Isn't it wonderful? Something marvelous is happening to me now." She changed her wealth vibration, and reality reorganized itself to match her new frequency. But perhaps the most dramatic example of Abdullah's teaching came from one of his own students, a man who faced obstacles that seemed absolutely insurmountable. Abdullah once told me about a student who came to him convinced that external circumstances were keeping him poor. This man believed that because of the color of his skin, because of what he called the accident of birth, opportunities for financial advancement were permanently denied to him. He was certain the entire world was structured against him. He could point to signs as large as all outdoors denying him access to certain areas. He could show physical evidence of discrimination. How could his poverty possibly be caused by his consciousness when society itself seemed designed to keep him down? But Abdullah looked at this man and said something shocking. There is no cause outside of the arrangement of your own mind. You must first start with self. Find self. Don't be ashamed of the being you are. Discover it and start changing that self. The man struggled with this teaching. How could his poverty be self-created when he faced real, tangible discrimination? But Abdullah insisted, "You have consented to these restrictions. You have arranged your mind around the assumption of being a secondary citizen. And that arrangement of mind is what draws these experiences to you." This was hard for the man to accept, but he began to examine his consciousness honestly. And he discovered something shocking. He was living as the self who expected limitation, the self who assumed rejection, the self who believed circumstances made him powerless. He had been conditioned from childhood to see himself as lesser, and he had unconsciously accepted that identity. So he began the transformation Abdullah taught. He started closing the door on his old identity and opening himself to a new consciousness, the consciousness of unlimited opportunity. It took him almost 3 years to fully overcome the fixed idea that he was a secondary citizen. 3 years of daily work to transform his wealth vibration from poverty to prosperity. But he persisted, and the results were extraordinary. One Sunday morning, this man found me in the lobby of my building. He wanted to show me something. "Neville," he said, "come see what your teaching, what Abdullah's teaching has created." He took me to his office on Wilshire Boulevard, a beautiful space with excellent facilities. But that wasn't what he wanted to show me. "I picked this location," he explained, "not because it was the only one offered to me. 4 equally wonderful spots were offered. I chose this one because it had better telephone facilities. But the others were just as good." Then he looked at me with tears in his eyes. "Neville, this year I will net $250,000. $250,000 in the 1940s. From a man who just a few years earlier believed the entire world was against him by accident of birth. He had completely transformed his wealth vibration, and reality had reorganized itself to match his new frequency. Now let me give you the exact process Abdullah taught me for transforming your wealth vibration. The foundation is uncritical observation. Tonight, simply notice your automatic reactions to thoughts about money. How do you feel when wealth is mentioned? What assumptions arise when you see prosperous people? What beliefs surface when you imagine yourself wealthy? Don't judge these reactions. Simply observe them. As Abdullah taught, the acceptance of self is the essence of transformation. You cannot change what you refuse to see clearly. Once you've observed your current wealth vibration, you begin to assume a new state. You assume you are the self who naturally possesses wealth. Not someone who hopes to become wealthy, not someone who's trying to get wealthy, but someone who is wealthy in consciousness right now. And here's the test Abdullah gave me. How will you know you've truly changed? By observing your reactions. If you've genuinely assumed the wealthy state, your automatic responses will shift. You'll no longer feel anxiety about money, no resentment toward the rich, no fear of lack. Your reactions will naturally change because you're thinking from wealth, not of wealth. But you must persist in this assumption until, as Abdullah taught, all of your energies are flowing from that state, and it becomes so stable that it definitely expels all rivals. And if you're wondering how to make this transformation feel natural instead of forced, how to maintain this new consciousness when everything around you seems to contradict it, I know this transformation isn't easy. Abdullah's teaching requires complete honesty about your current consciousness, an unwavering commitment to your new identity. But you don't have to do it alone, and you don't have to figure out every step by yourself. If you want the complete system for making this identity transformation feel natural and sustainable, if you want specific techniques for maintaining your wealthy consciousness, even when circumstances seem to contradict it, comment "Reset" below to receive the Manifest Reset Guide. These 5 shifts will help you navigate the transformation from poverty consciousness to wealth consciousness without the internal resistance that stops most people. You don't need to struggle. You only need the right tools to make the shift smooth and permanent. But let me leave you with the deepest truth Abdullah ever shared with me. The reason most people remain poor is not because they don't know techniques. They remain poor because they're terrified of letting their poor self die. They become so identified with struggle, so attached to limitation, that they cannot imagine existing as a different self entirely. But here's what Abdullah taught me. That poor self was never really you anyway. It was just an arrangement of beliefs you accepted and maintained. You are not your poverty consciousness. You are the awareness that can choose any consciousness. When you truly understand this, when you realize you have the power to be any self you choose, something miraculous happens. You stop trying to get wealth. You start being wealth. You stop hoping for abundance. You start assuming abundance. And reality must conform to your new vibration. This complete understanding of how to assume not just wealth, but every desire as already fulfilled, this is what transforms you from someone who occasionally manifests into someone who lives in permanent fulfillment. The teaching I prepared for you next reveals this advanced level of consciousness. Assume everything is already yours, shows you how to live as the self who lacks nothing, wants nothing, because you already possess everything in consciousness. Together with Abdullah's wealth vibration teaching, it will complete your transformation from seeker to possessor, from the self who wants to the self who has. The video is appearing on your screen right now. Watch it immediately after this one to discover how to apply this wealth consciousness to every area of your life.